why it's the different. I need the not front camera.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another demo, another Wednesday morning. A little rainier than last time. I hope everyone made it through the storm. Okay. Couple housekeeping things as usual. We're going to use the chat for any questions throughout the demo. So feel free to drop anything and everything in that chat. If questions feel pressing, like material based, or things that we want to clarify while YoAhn is working, we'll make sure to address those as they come up. Larger questions we'll probably save towards the end and have a conversation with YoAhn after the work. So definitely utilize that feature. If you have questions, you can put them there too for us. And a quick plug before we get started for some upcoming programs that we have here at Concord Art. The Roddy just ended, beautiful show. We're so glad that any of you who might have exhibited there. And our faculty show is going to be opening just a week from tomorrow. We're featuring 50 artists who have been teaching at Concord Art and contributing to our educational programs. So we're really, really excited to honor those folks and to celebrate with them and with you on Saturday, November 6th. We'll have a little outdoor reception on the patio with some cider and donuts and other snacks to honor those teachers. And we're going to have some more events throughout the coming months for the faculty show. So keep an eye out. And then one last thing, our call for art for our postcard show, our 5x7 show is officially out. You can find out more online, concordart.org/postcards. And that sale is going to be happening in December. So that's that. Without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce an artist who I have admired for many years. Yo Ahn Han. He is represented by Chase Young Gallery. He studied at the Art Institute in Chicago and at Mass Art, and is currently teaching around Massachusetts and Rhode Island, I think at RISD and Mass Art. And he is going to be sharing his practice today, his detail-oriented practice of collage and wet media stains. So I will hand it over to YoAhn, and he will show you around his studio and jump right into some demonstrations. So thank you so much, YoAhn, for being with us. We're really excited to have you.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me and hear me well?
I think
yes.
We can't hear you just yet. Let me see.
First of all, Marissa, it's really an honor for me to have this opportunity in your program in Concord Art, and I'm very excited to show my studio and how my daily routine when I don't have to teach can be like. So first of all, I would like to just have a little sneak peek of how my studio looks like. It's only 11 by 11. It's a tiny little studio, and I often call it as my little windowless magical prison cell. But I want to show the works are on the studio first, and then I'll start to do my other process. Okay, I have this wonderful assistant right here. My husband is helping me out for doing this whole shooting with me. We're doing a teamwork right now. So first, we are just going to see what is in my studio happening. So that's the work that I have shown with Marissa before in the master that has been transformed. And then the one you're just looking at, the blue background, that turquoise green, it's a very new one I just finished about just probably a week ago. So that's how my studio space looks like. It's not really a large space, but I enjoy being in here all day, every day, if I possibly can be. And the good part is that I at least have a long ceiling. The studio used to be in 52 Everest Street in the Lower Alston. It has a little larger studio. I just moved in here about 5-6 months ago. So And there's another piece I just recently finished, which I recently started to incorporate not only my paper cuts, but also some dry media. So the one you're looking at right now, it's gray paper and color pencil background using a different chroma of blues and green, pink and purple. And then I did some other collage work on there. So right next to it, I have a small little mini library, which I use it for my references. It has some of the archives from my previous classes and etc. So that's how my studio looks like. And now I would like to show how I work on my daily routine. First of all, I want to just introduce what paper I specifically use a lot. Many of you probably know about it already. So this is translucent surface of Yupo. There are two different types of Yupo available, the white one and translucent one. And I love using the translucent one a lot. And first of all, it's not a paper, it's actually 100% polypropylene. So it's a piece of plastic. And I do a lot of drawing on here and the cut papers here, and then also making a stain. And over the month and months, I do so much of collage. And then in the end, just put them together. So first I want to show you, before I do anything, I want to show you what I'm actually working on. So this is the Yupo that I stained with acrylic gouache. I normally use the Collage acrylic gouache, which is one of the two brands I know that works really well. And I mix it with the water and then just pour onto the Yupo surface. And then when it takes 11-15 hours to dry, it makes this really interesting, almost reticulation mark, as if a tree ring formation. And then after the things dried out, I just flip the paper and I start to do many different types of drawings. I use a lot of the Korean symbolic systems, for example, floral caskets, lotus flower, you're looking at it, and some chrysanthemum flowers too. So this one has been working for a while with me. And then today I'm going to just put it aside and try to go over a new piece. I don't know how it will be ended up looking like within this hour-long time, and let's see what's going to happen. So I have this new piece of Yupo, and I will start to do the drawing part first, and then cut out to see what kind of form I want to get it. Before I do it, I just want to show you some of the pre-cut ones I have in my studio all the time, such as this, all done by exacto knives, and some piece of this, the multiplicity of chrysanthemum. And then I also just cut regular paper as well, some occasionally. And now let's see, I want to make floral formation to begin with my pencil. Normally I use 2B or 4B pencils, and well, I always sharpen by myself. So this is pointy pencils you can get to see. Let's see, I will do the drawing first and then start to cut papers. Sometimes I relying on to the pre-made images, but some other times I just draw from the memory and patterns and forms.
YoAhn, there's a couple questions that I'll just throw to you while you're.
Oh yeah, sure.
First question is just about your work surface. Do you usually work on the table like that, or do you ever use an easel?
Well, I barely use easel. When I use the vertical format, I actually use a wall. And also I pouring water a lot, so it's not that much beneficial for me to use the easel. Although when I start to do the collage in process, I use the vertical form. I use on the wall, but I don't necessarily have easel in my studio.
Yeah. And then some questions about the Yupo. Is that Yupo archival? Does it get brittle over time?
Yupo is pretty archival, surprisingly. It doesn't really get discolored, or I mean, if it's watercolor always have the color be faded over time. But other than that, the pigments actually sit down onto the surface pretty well. I have some of the work that has been with me for 6-7 years and still looks a nice form. Yes.
And then more Yupo questions.
Okay.
How do you cut Yupo? Do you use the exacto knife, or do you ever use a laser cutter?
Right next to me right now. Yes, that's what I'm
Nice.
doing now. So I often think that actually I'm not necessarily a traditional painter. I'm more like a drawer with a knife. That's how I describe myself a lot.
Mhm. And then one more, and then we'll let you work. How do you usually adhere the Yupo backing? How do
I
you
use
adhere Yupo
just
to backing paper?
very, you'll be surprised. I use not even fancy glue. I use two different forms of Elmer's glue. I use the Elmer's glue spray, and also I use the Elmer's glue by itself. Just put it into the jar and then just mixing a little bit with the water so it can get a little more liquidy, so that I can brush it out with my watercolor brushes and then juxtapose it.
Great. Okay, we're gonna let you work for a few minutes, and then if there are more questions.
Well,
we'll bring
any question coming in, just let me know.
Great.
And then, by the way, I will use the small little clay board today. Clay board as a surface. Let's see what I can do with it.
YoAhn, can you tell us one more time what the name of the spray glue was? The Elmer's spray.
Elmer's glue spray. It's called a Craft Bond. That's what it's called here.
Craft Bond.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's actually sometimes more useful than the Elmer's glue itself, because it has more adhesiveness, thickness that almost act as if you're hairspray. Of course, I use other types of glue occasionally too. Everybody probably know the glue called PVA, which is often used by bookmaking. But I don't necessarily use something like a Mod Podge. I want any glue that dries clear.
Another question while you're working.
Yeah.
Do you ever depart from the lacier, more intricate shapes and work with the larger shapes in Yupo?
I'm sorry, you mean, am I changing the scales depending on what I'm doing?
I think so. The scale and also the amount of detail in the kind of. I think
Yeah. Sometimes I make a lot border cuts. So probably right now I'm only doing probably 1-inch cut to very 1 millimeter cut. But some other occasions I just cut like a 5-6 inch, just cut it out right away. I had one work which has been shown in Korean consulate in Newton about 2 years ago. And one part of the cutting was just 7 inch to 15-inch section, just cut it right away. So it's not always this elaborated.
Yeah. And then if you can, while you're working, someone's curious to hear more about the cultural significance of the chrysanthemums in your work.
Oh, okay. So in my content, I deals a lot with the dynamics between sex and death. And then I think about death a lot of different formats. And I was just looking at a lot of Korean culture where I came from. And the white chrysanthemum is actually a symbol of death. And when you go to the funeral, actually you are bringing the white chrysanthemum. And then color of white, unlike the Western culture, it's more purity or some other meaning. In Korea, it's sometimes symbolizing the death. So that's part of the reason why I use chrysanthemum a lot. Alongside the similar line, some of my work has caterpillar fungus and also praying mantis. For example, praying mantis, many of you probably know already, the female eats the male during or after the copulation. And also caterpillar fungus, which we also call it as if cordyceps, they spread out their pollen inside the living insect, and the insect is slowly dying out, and then the fungus itself blooms. So I kind of always try to capture those types of phenomena. But I used 2 different flowers the most, my recent works, including chrysanthemum and titanarum. It's also called corpse scent flowers. And the flower is originated from Sumatra Island, Indonesia, and then it is so far recorded as if the largest flower on earth. And every 12 to 13 years, the flower only blooms probably 1 or 2 days. And it has its own phallic form, which is distinctive. At the same time, it smells like a dead body.
One quick process question. Are you cutting against the clay board? I think not. You're cutting on a mat and then adhering to it.
It's just a cutting mat. Yes, it's not clay board.
And then the clay board is what you'll adhere to.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to use. I use clay board or just regular panel, wood panels. I don't normally use canvas, although I have one piece in my studio right now that I adhered everything in canvas. But other than that, I like the flat matte surface of the wood. And that's, for me, it's nice to have the collage on it without having any warping. All right.
If you can talk a little bit about people are wondering if you can elaborate more on your ideas and fascination with death as symbols in the work.
Yeah, of course. It has to come with my own personal storyline. Actually, I was born with very interesting brain condition, which is called brain vascular malformation. So even from the very beginning stage of my life, my left side of brain blood vessel has been twisted in very complicated way. So I experienced something similar to seizure or epilepsy once or twice a year. So when I have the symptom came in as an episode, I'm paralyzed my one side of body, normally the right side of body. And also some moment of time, about 5 to 10 minutes, I'm unable to deliver my linguistic sections. My tongue just stopped working. So when that happens, I just feel as if that doesn't stop, that may be the quality of death and something is ceased to exist. So I know I'm very young artist, emerging artist, but I've been thinking about the death in different ways a lot of times, and some kind of lacking of physical mobility for a while. And that was the beginning of me jumping over to the topic a lot of times. That makes any sense. And the next reiteration for me to think about the lacking section was for me to have kind of the bifurcated identity. Someone who's born and raised in quite conservative environment in Korea and living as a queer person was also kind of affecting me a lot in different ways. And it was not directly related to the death, but I've been thinking a lot about suppression and desire in certain ways along the line. That's why some of my most recent works are a form of figure made by floral and fauna symbolic bodies. I think one flower is almost done. Sometimes I cut the negative part of the paper, sometimes I cut the positive part of the paper. So this exercise resembles a lot to do with Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock printing. And actually I directly influenced by me looking at the Hokusai exhibition at the MFA when they had that happen about 6-7 years ago. And I tried to find a way of making similar physical surface without necessarily using the traditional printmaking ways. And that's when I started to use collage as my major platform. Okay, this is how the cutouts normally look like when they just cut something like that. I'm going to put it right here And then actually, I'm also going to use a black paper. So I just have it right next to it. And I want to see different kind of color inside to try to cut a little bit of different shape. We'll use color pencil a little bit and see what kind of cut I can have together with this paper cut I just have made.
Quick question about the flower, YoAhn.
Yeah.
Were the lines sketched out before you cut, or is that intuitive, ad-libbed?
You mean the sketch I just did before I cut the white Yupo earlier?
Yeah, was that pre-sketched?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pre-sketched. And
Got it.
right now I'm not really doing any sketch for the black paper.
What brand of colored pencil are you working with?
I've been using many different brands, but my favorite is probably many of you are using too, Prismacolor. I like it. That's my go-to. I just like the way Prismacolor works in terms of how they saturate the color at places that I need and want.
YoAhn, can you talk a little bit about when your work first started kind of getting attention, maybe in galleries, and what that journey has been like?
Yeah, so I don't know. So there will be a few people maybe know very early stage of my artwork in grad school, which I had in Massart from 2012 to 14. I was actually not doing any sort of paper cut. It was all blobs of waters and also texture elements, which I'm still using. There's some sort of a paper pulp I'm using with the toilet papers and all different types of colors. And it was a lot more semi-sculptural work, and flat work didn't really have much of the form or quality before. But then around the time in the end of 2014, starting of 2015, I started to utilize the similar language by, so that's actually one of the work I've been doing in the grad school times, the paper pulp. And you can still see the cutouts, but it was not really identifiable. But when I started to use more recognizable shapes, technically when I started the representation and abstraction and finding its own convergence, that's when I started to get a little more attention. My very first gallery show was actually at the Art Mora Gallery in New York, where they had their gallery in Chelsea, and I worked with them for 1 year. And then I was lucky enough to move on to the gallery where I'm working together with right now, JCM Gallery, since the early 2017. That was the moment. I don't know if I answer your question clearly. On top of that, I also started to archive my work in epoxy resin. Today in this demo, we're not going to use resin. It's very toxic. And after I do this luminous surface thing, that was one of the moments that started to kind of give me some archiver methodology, which I never really thought about before. That's what I do the last, by the way. After I do all this collage work, then I put the resin on top. If I just make everything in the paper, I also use plexiglass frame, specific types of framing. Probably many of you know, it's called shadow box. That's another way I do it in terms of the archival purpose. Honestly, I still don't think I'm that much recognized artist. I'm just learning to be a better artist every day. Each paper reacts differently for the exacto knife. You kind of need to understand if you're using Yupo to cut it or watercolor paper to cut it or construction papers to cut it. It just gives you different types of grip.
And where do you get epoxy resin, and can you use it in your studio?
Actually, I do use in my studio. I get it from many different art supplies. Recently, I just get the one from Artist and Craftsman. They have this art resin. Each resins are different, but the one art resin is a little thinner, so it's spread out nice for me. But when I do it in my studio, I just spread it out and I leave the space. So that's probably the last thing I do if I have the whole day of working. And I don't come back to my studio until the next day or two. Because it's toxic when it's curing, no matter what kind of resin you're using, if it's regular resin. I've heard that recently people use water-based resin or some other types of resin, but I haven't tried those. To tell the truth, when I first started to use resin, actually I used resin from Home Depot. That's what I used to use. But I realized that some of the resin I had from Home Depot, it has a chance to discolor certain parts, like making it yellow easily. So I stopped using it.
Here's another question about your adhesion process.
Uh-huh.
What did you use to adhere the paper pulp 3D pieces on the Yupo paper?
I did a few occasions. Yes, I did.
But what did you use? Was it the
Well, I still use the same
same
Elmer's.
Elmer's? Yeah.
But recently I don't do that often. If I'm going to use the paper pulp alongside with my cutouts, I use the wood panel as a surface. Because paper can still be warped a little bit. And then when the glue is drying in the process, the wrinkle starts to happen in certain interesting ways. I recently made a piece in 5 feet by 5 feet wood, but then that piece had not only the Yupo to be juxtaposed, but also paper pulp was there too.
Here's a good question. Do you have any problems or pain in your left hand after using the Exacto knife for a long time?
Oh yes, I think it's like a disease of the profession. I oftentimes just have little pain in my wrist, and also the muscle right here. It's sometimes a little painful, but I don't know what's the best way to fix it. I just like have a little rest, I guess. Or instead of cutting too much, sometimes I just draw more things. But so far it was not in the point that it's seriously ill that I cannot really cut it. Cutting is probably, I would say, 80% of my studio time. As I mentioned before, one of the pieces I have done a few years ago was just about paper cut and shadow, not even using any colors. So I have this a few cutouts now, and I'm trying to use them to collage in a way. But before I collage, I want to make the surface. So I have the white paper cut I have made earlier, and I have a few other things I already have made in advance. I want to show you this one, for example. That's the mark that Yupo paper makes. If everybody can see this blue. So you can see this kind of ripple effect. That's where the paint has been in the surface for a really long time, about 5-6 hours, and then makes its own nice little mark. And then when it dried out, as you saw me doing, I flipped the paper and then started to cut it with exacto knife. So you can have some nice mark, not necessarily made by me, made by the nature, have been given to me.
Can you,
So
when you have
yeah.
a second, can you just hold maybe one of the cutouts closer to the camera so you can see the detail?
Can you see it?
Yeah.
I hope it was good to see. And then I'm not going to show you today, but I'm also using, I'm gonna show you everyone. I also use special pigment powder, which I began a few months ago. This is called the mica powder. I use this shimmery powder, mixing with water and acrylic medium, and then pour it as well. And then it starts to dry with very much sparkling, shimmery color. So I will show you how it dried out. For example, when I show this very closely, can everybody see it?
Yeah, the camera's, just give it a second to focus. Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it has like a shimmery
Mhm.
effect. So that's another thing I use. Now, I'm going to make a little ground, just simple little horizon I want to make by using a tape. Well, I'm sure so many of you use tape for your work, so as I. And I'm just going to start to use it to make just some sort of horizon here. I want like this section right here to cut. It's not perfect, but I'm going to try anyway. And I will use acrylic gouache to make really flat surface. Not watercolor necessarily. Okay, now I want to use, okay, there's a interesting color I have, which is called ash rose. Let me see, this is the color I have acrylic gouache for. It's like a red plus gray types of color. And I'm not necessarily going to use any kind of palette. I'm just going to apply directly. Just wetting my brush a little bit. And then directly just pour the paint a little bit on the surface.
Yoann, if you're not gonna use it today, can you repeat the process of using that mica powder?
Mica powder.
Mica powder.
Yeah, you can also call it mica, so M-I-K-A. So it comes with you know, this kind of jar which has the powder in it. It's really interesting and beautiful color. You can get it. So I never knew about it until right before pandemic. I was able to go to San Francisco Museum of Asian Art, and then there was a Chinese master. Unfortunately, I forgot the name of the painter, but he uses the mica powder a lot in his painting, and the shiny surface was super interesting for me. So I tried out, and I'm still using it for my work. The purpose of this section is I just want to make a matte surface of this color right here. Nothing special. Matte opaque color surface.
So about the mica, do you add it to acrylic paint?
No,
Is it
I didn't add
what it is
anything.
to the
This
media?
is this is just pure acrylic wash. I
No,
didn't
no,
add
no. But when you use the mica powder,
a mica powder.
I think so.
Oh, yeah, when I use the mica powder, I add so I use mica powder maybe 1 or 2 scoops, like the way you used matcha powder for matcha tea. And then I just put, let's say, 1 inch or a little less, maybe ½ inch water, and then 1 scoop of acrylic matte or glossy media, so it can have its own little thickness, so that it mixes the mica powder well enough. And then I just directly pour it on the paper. That's how I do it.
And what kind of brush are you using to apply the gouache?
Well, I actually, as you saw it, I just used my watercolor brush. I know many traditional watercolorists may not like me doing it, but I just regular watercolor brush do it.
I think they'll forgive you.
I hope they do. Be generous to me, please. So I just got a little flat surface here, and then for the second half of the section here, I would probably not going to necessarily paint, just leave it as a white clapboard by itself. And we're not going to do a whole lot of pouring session, but I still want to, while it is drying in process, I want to use a little bit of watercolor to make any kind of surface. And I'm hoping it to be dried out during this demo. How much time we have now?
We're just well, about to hit 12:30, so you have a good half hour left for demo consultation. Yeah.
12:30, okay, I see. Because I want to show a little bit of collage sections. So let me see. So, okay, I'm gonna skip the watercolor part. I just wanna show the collage section a little bit. I think that would be better. By the way, since I'm not going to show the watercolor because of the time, I just want to show my palette. This is my watercolor palette, and I have the gigantic one. And as much as I use the acrylic wash for the Holbein, I also use Holbein brand, just putting all the warmer color one side and cooler color in the other side, so that it's good for me to manage. And since watercolor takes quite a long time to dry in terms of the Yupo paper, I'm just going to quickly do my collaging session. I have a little bit of Elmer's glue, which I already made here, so I'll use that. Again, I'm using my watercolor brush to apply. You can use all different types of soft brush to apply, actually. When you're using your precious brushes, make sure that after you finish, you should wash it with a nice soap. That way, your brush will survive longer. Okay, so I have this abandoned paper where I'm going to put the colors in to be able to collage. So that's the last thing I'm going to do, just a collaging. I don't have much of the spray left. Let's see how much I have. Oh, spray. Okay, I still have some. If I have spray, I don't really have to use too much of the glue with the brush. Sometimes I use the brush to press it out. And on some other occasions, I also use blow dryer to force it to stick there nicely. So the last thing I'm gonna do is just the collaging process, as I mentioned. Okay, many times I spend so much time figuring out where I'm gonna put what types of things in terms of what spaces I want to have, what kind of feature queue I want to have. But today I'm more like going with the flow. That's the way I want it to be done today. Hope you can see what's going on. And I want this guy to be somewhere in the left-hand side corner. So this one, I'm actually going to use the brush. I will overlap with the flower I had before. And probably one last thing I would like to have is that shimmery mica powder one to be one part. I think that will be it. The last thing I'll do. And just a little touch of blow dryer. That'll be it.
So Yoan, when you overlap,
Yes.
when you
Yes.
overlap two Yupo cutouts, do they get thick or bumpy in terms of the layers being built up? Is it smooth?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, when the two Yupo cutouts overlap on the board, does it get thick or bumpy at all on the surface?
It gets thicker, but Yupo is really, really thin. So it's really not gonna be that much bumpier. And also Yupo is a plastic, it doesn't really work unless you forward it. So it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be stay flat.
Mm.
I'm just gonna do a little quick of the blow dryer. All right, so we just made a small little, cutout collage sessions. One part I used black paper, I used colored pencil, and then one of the work I already prepared for this, the long exposure staining session. Then the white one, the translucent one, I just started to cut earlier today. And then normally after I finish this way, I put the resin on top. That's how I finish it. So any other questions?
There are some questions. Sorry about that, dog. My dog barking. So there was a request to see a brief demo of how you use the watercolor technique on Yupo if you can. And before that, another question that said, you initially put down tape on the clay board for the horizon Oh yeah, did you leave it on or you removed it? I think you removed it, right? You peeled that off.
I removed it. The
Yeah.
tape has been removed. There's no more tape.
And then if you do have if you can demo a little bit of the watercolor technique on Yupo, I think people would love to see that.
So I know we are out of time, but so in Yupo, you can do all different types of watercolor techniques, including wet on wet, bleeding. Bleeding means you just pour the water first and then work within the water, which is the most beautiful reiteration. It just takes forever to dry, as I mentioned, sometimes 12 to 15 hours to dry. And one of the technique, which is a little bit harder for you to do, is to make a dry brush layering technique, which means when you make a first layer of the paint and then let it dry, if you want to put the next layer on top of it, it reacts a little different from watercolor paper. Watercolor paper, it just piling up like stack by stack. But in Yupo, when you put the next layer, what can happen is that the previous layer can disappear. And that's a good and bad part of Yupo paper. The good part is that when you mess up your watercolor in the Yupo, you can just water it and clean it up, and then you can use the second way. But in terms of the layering technique, it's a little bit of disadvantage of doing it. But for me, when I use the watercolor, I use mostly for this bleeding technique, which I used in this demonstration for this blue section. Since I knew that I may not gonna have time to do it in demonstration, so that's why I'm gonna close it one more time. So this blue part was done by watercolor and then let it dry completely before I started to cut out.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I think so. Folks, YoAhn has a class he has to teach after this, so we have to be pretty prompt about our timing. But I mean, YoAhn, we have another 30 minutes blocked out for you if you have the time and you want to do it.
Oh, we have another 30 minutes?
Yeah, we
Oh.
can go till 1 for sure. I usually, because we've been taking questions throughout, we kind of
Yeah.
are a little bit more flexible on our time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought we were in rush.
Oh no.
Okay, then I'll start to do some watercolor parts.
Great. And while you set up, maybe we can go to this next question.
Yeah.
The question was, how do you think the collage pieces would work differently if you did them on mixed media paper as opposed to Yupo, I think?
Mixed media paper. It's Yupo is a little bit easier to collage because, as I mentioned, Yupo doesn't work. If it's mixed media paper or any kind of paper, you need to still worry about a little bit of fear of warpiness and how flat you want. But when the paper does not give you the flat surface, that's sometimes a bit of frustration. So I make the water to be just on the paper, let's say right now. Putting it in. You can see the little bit of yellowish color you see. And I'm just using water to block the area, certain area. And then you can really work within the color in a very magical way. For example, let me just pull out this purplish color. And then see what kind of fun gesture I can make. Yupo is going to react to very fun, interesting way that you will never experience with watercolor paper. Some people really hate it. Some people said that to me one time. Painting on Yupo feels as if just touching the fish scale almost. Then I can incorporate some other colors. Let me just put a little bit of red to work with. Before that, I may want a little more water to be poured. So it can be more wet. So.
There's one other question about the epoxy resin. Just to clarify, so that layer of epoxy resin goes over the whole composition when you're finished, is that right?
Yeah, I just pour it evenly. So what I do normally with this wood panel, I put the masking tape all four edges on the bottom part first, and then I mix the epoxy resin. I'm sure that people know how to mix it. Just resin and the hardener, half and half, and mixing for 6 to 7 minutes like this way. And then you pour it. After I pour it, it just doesn't automatically get evened up. So I use something like this types of spatula looking thing to even it out. And then when you have the water bubbles, you can use a heat gun to get it out a little bit. And you may not want to be there for a long time because of the toxic. You want to leave. I hope I answered for the resin related question. And the fun part is that right now, it doesn't really look like anything, just like doing this surface of Mars or marbling effect. But the fun part of the Yupo paper, when you apply watercolor or other mediums such as acrylic or even acrylic gouache, it dries as if it's still wet. So when it dries out, we may not get to see a whole lot about the dryness, but when it dries out, it's still going to look like a little bit wet because of the plastic surface that makes it possible. I'm going to just put a little more mark making different colors.
So here's another question about finishing. Do you use other mediums to finish besides resin? Do you ever use acrylic medium or varnish?
I never use other medium because if I use varnish, watercolor can be affected. Resin never touched the watercolor, but if the brush touches the surface of watercolor with a varnish, watercolor can get peeled off. So I just don't do it. Or as I mentioned before, instead of doing the resin finish on the wood panel, I just work directly on the paper itself and then doing a shadow box frame. That's another way I do it. And you can also make mark with paintbrush itself. That's more like a dry-ish brushes I'm using right now, which means a little less of the water, more paint. And in that way, it dries out a little bit quickly. And one more thing you need to know about Yupo, if you are going to use Yupo in your own work, try not to get your hands in the paper too much, because when you have oil from the hand coming into the paper, that section you cannot paint. Every time you try to paint, it will just efface it. So that's one thing you need to know about. So for example, right now, when you see the closely, the purple section right here in the left-hand side, it already started to dry. And then when you look at some section right there, when the purple and blue meeting, you start to see a little bit of the line quality here. And also you see the line quality happening here as well. That's exactly how they're gonna dry. So it's going to make its own little wrinkles. So after I make this water and paint situation, I normally don't really touch much. I just want the water and the surface is doing their own job. So what they are doing right here is chemically, they are making its own reticulation mark, almost as I mentioned, 3 ring types of formation. it marks the time of dry onto the surface. Yeah, I'm glad that I had a little time to show how I utilized the Yupo surface. And then earlier today, way earlier today, I also showed you the ones which is already dried. I'm gonna show it again. When you see it here, I'm going to show you more clearly. That has its own mark making that recorded the time element. And this one is done by acrylic gouache. And the one I was showing earlier, which is still in drying process, that is watercolor. So the way you see it, the way it dries out, it's gonna be completely different.
One more clarification on the board that you're working with. The
Yes,
wood panel, is the wood panel the same as the clay board? Are they different? And do you prefer one or the other if they are different?
normally I use wood panel by itself, but to me it just doesn't do many differences. The way I use clay board is because it's the white color is given to it already. So when I need white as a background, I don't need to repaint or doing gessoing other kind of thing anymore. So I can just use white as the way white. It
Yeah.
doesn't really, at least in my types of execution, doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But the clay
Yeah.
board is like an additional surface on top of a wood panel as opposed
Yeah,
to
and
being like
also
the
when I
same.
use the larger panel, actually, I make the panel by itself. So what you're looking at right now is the plywood I buy and then build the wood panel. My partner is actually helping me building it. So the ones, all the works that you're looking at right now, it's all done by the wood panel. That's the back side of the wood panel, how it looks like, for example. So by the plywood and other 4 sections that we cut it and made it. So I normally don't buy a large wood panel. First, it's very expensive. And also if you know how to make it, it's nice. However, the small one I have it, which I just finished probably a few days ago, the 16 by 21. I just bought it from art supply store. It's a pre-made wood panel. Yeah, that's how it looks like.
Mm. Great, thank you.
Yes. So I try to show how my studio normally looks like every daily basis. All this painting and collage part actually happens very end section. In normal occasions, about weeks and weeks, month and month, I just have a paper cut surrounded by the entire studio. Some of the cuts are as large as 5 feet by 7 feet or even larger. And then the last moment, I just need to find a way to put them together. So it was a very instant, quick version today, the way I showed you how it looks like and how the process is activating to you. And I hope it was helpful. And if you have any other questions, please let me know.
Yeah, if there are other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If anyone has a question they want to ask themselves, and you'd like to unmute, now's a great time to do so. We have a couple more minutes, so feel free to unmute and talk to Yo Ahn. Or you can put them in the chat and I can ask.
Either or, it's welcome.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, maybe if people are thinking about what they might want to ask, is it possible to see some of the finished works?
Yes.
I know we kind of just saw a little bit, but maybe like closer up or longer.
Sure, we can do that. So we can show some of the large work close-ups. That way people can see it. So that's the work I also just finished about 3 weeks ago, I believe. that actually has a nice funny story. Marissa have seen it in previous version of this paint in Master 2000, probably 13 or 14. And then I just put it aside for a really long time, years and years. And this year when I saw it back, I just had a new reiteration. That's when I started to use the green, almost like bronze looking mica powder, mixing with watercolor. And there's another paint I forgot to mention I'm using, flash paint, Fleshe. It's very flat paint. When you see this very bright green, almost like emerald green part, that's the color. So I mixed the color on the Yupo, and as you see, I cut this gigantic figurative, almost like torso section and leg sections. And then I put them on top of what I thought I finished long ago. And then this painting is reborn. So my work is slowly turning into more figurative direction. At least the last half year so far.
While we're looking, can you talk a little bit about your routine? Do you go to the studio every day? Is there like a sort of working routine that you're in? I mean, I know you're teaching tons of classes, so it's probably very different right now.
I'm teaching like 9 to 11 classes from Master, CCAE, and MFA. But whenever I'm not teaching, my life is quite simple. Either I'm somewhere teaching or I'm in my studio. Yes. When I have the whole day for myself, I try to secure at least 9 to 10 hours being in the studio. Well, that doesn't always mean that I'm working 9 to 10 hours. Sometimes sit down looking at the work. Or, yeah, I'm pretty regular in terms of my studio routine. Whenever I find time, I come here and try to hustle through my work.
And someone in the chat mentioned that they saw your work at Chase Young and loved how beautiful they were. And I'll just add that it's so great to see them on Zoom, but I think everyone has to go see your work in person because it's so different when you can really see the texture and the color and the detail. And YoAhn actually just had a show open in Manchester, New Hampshire, a solo show. So if you want to make a trip or you find yourself up there, check out that solo show. We just shared it on our Instagram.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely see it in person if you can.
Yeah, and this work you're looking at, I actually, it was the first time actually I'm doing color pencil on top of some of the Yupo. So you can see certain part is not necessarily painted, some part is drawn dry media as color pencil on top of Yupo.
And the other thing, YoAhn, about your work that I think it's so hard for us to tell online is how big it is. I mean, you're really working at a large scale. That I think
well, right now what you're looking at is 5 feet by 5 feet. Yes, I love working large, although my studio doesn't allow me all the time. And in the April exhibition, I know some of you have seen my work in person in Chase Young this year. There was one piece of work that Marissa, you used for the promotional page. That one was 64 by 80. That's probably the largest work I've done since my grad school.
Yeah, we actually had a photo of that one in the opening slideshow with you standing next to it, so people could really see that like these are big. Two questions while we're looking.
Yes.
Can you? This one's quick. Can you repeat what you were saying about the flash paint?
The flash, yeah. That's the opaque paint I just found out about a few years ago. It's spelled Fleshe, and they sell it in Blake or Artisan Craftsman, and it's just really opaque paint. I use it a lot specifically for making the matte background when I need it. And it's from France, and they have so many different types of colors available. And sometimes Blake doesn't have enough stock but you can find it. You can find it at the Artist and Craftsman.
Mhm. We lost your video, but take your time.
Okay, just a second.
And
Yeah,
then
you
there
can
was,
go on for the question.
yeah, there's another question, and I think I'll direct it towards a specific painting. I think that's what we were looking at when Mark asked this, but can you talk a little bit about the meaning or the conceptual drive or the conceptual meaning behind the 5x5 blue one in particular with the
On the
figure?
blue one, yes, the blue one, the large one I showed. That is called Joy and Pathos. So I was thinking about just like ups and downs, ebbs and flows of life. First, I simply thought about the idea of Scholar's Rock, and we also call it Gongshui in Asia, Korea, Japan, China. A lot of rocks which has holes inside. And in front of Museum of Fine Art Boston, you can actually find one too. And when you go inside, in second floor, it's Song Dynasty section, you can find a lot of the naturally formed rock, which has a lot of holes in it. So it looks very intriguing and visceral, but it's not human manipulated, but naturally made rocks. But when I saw the rock, I was thinking about each one of the holes are where all these different types of curiosity or desires to be hidden. So that's when I put this blue color as forming as rock and the white cutouts to be made by figures and other activities happening inside. That's what I was thinking about it. So it's kind of negative and positive spaces in terms of the landscape in my own imaginary landscape. So to be specific, it should be called more mindscape in a way.
Well, I think that's all the questions. If anyone has any last minute questions that you want to drop in the chat now, we can address those. But if not, then I'll give folks a couple of seconds to type, and if we get more, we'll address them. And if not, we can close for the day.
Okay. Is there any?
Lots of thank you. That is really one of the biggest things coming through. YoAhn.
Wow, I'm so honored to be here, and then thanks so much everybody to listen to my mumbling speech.
No, not at all. Great. Well, yeah, I think this is a great place to close. And if anyone wants to connect, more with YoAhn, just reach out and we'll facilitate that. But see the show in Manchester, New Hampshire. I think it's up for a little while, at least a month. Folks have to go see that.
Yeah, it's until January at least.
January. Is it free to go? Do you need to make an appointment?
Yeah, it's free. It's in the high school.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you aren't on Instagram and you want information on that, just shoot me a message and I'll connect you. But if you are on Instagram and you follow us, it's in our story today, the post that will direct you to that gallery. So check that out. And I think, yeah, we'll close there. Thank you so much, YoAhn, for
Thank you.
giving us some time. I know your schedule is super busy, so we feel very honored.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
And enjoy your class today. Thank you to your fantastic studio assistant for helping.
Yes. That was professional.
A round of applause there. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Join us again in December. We have our final demo for this season. It's going to be in person in the gallery with Liz Thatch. We're really looking forward to it. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you, YoAhn. We'll talk
Bye.
soon.
Appreciate it. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everybody.
The battery is